I stood in the sunlit kitchen, coffee cold, my heart a silent scream. They left me, Nicholas and Audrey, erasing me with a car door's slam. No goodbye, just Dubai's glittering betrayal. My name, a ghost in their plans, ignited a quiet fury. I wasn't broken, not yet. In the hush of their deceit, I sharpened my truth, plotting their ruin. This is my awakening, born from love's cruel, silent discard. People always said I had the perfect life, the kind you see on glossy magazine covers. A handsome husband who wore tailored suits like Second Skin, a house that echoed quiet elegance, a mother-in-law who threw dinner parties that could make Martha Stewart sweat. But they didn't see the way Nicholas's smile stopped just before it reached his eyes. They didn't hear Audrey's sweet tone tighten like a noose when she said, "Oh, honey, I'll handle it." And they didn't know that every morning, when I made coffee in that sun-drenched kitchen, I was already bracing for the first invisible slap of the day. I wasn't born weak. I was raised to be polite, to say yes before I was asked, to shrink myself into the kind of woman men praise in public and ignore in private. Nicholas loved that about me in the beginning, said I was calm, supportive, low drama. Audrey loved it too. I fit into her life like a silent puzzle piece. There, but never loud enough to shift the picture. For a while, I played my part so well I almost forgot it was a role. Almost. The first crack didn't come with a scream. It came on a Tuesday. Nicholas forgot to log out of his email. I wasn't snooping. God, I wish I had been. At least then I could say I was prepared for what I saw. There it was. A thread of messages between him and Audrey. Discussions about freeing up funds, liquidating personal ties, and strategic distance. My name was never mentioned, but I knew. It felt like standing in a house where the walls had shifted just slightly, but enough that you knew it was no longer yours. I said nothing. Not that day. Not for many days after. Instead, I began to watch. Closely. I saw the bank statements go thinner. I saw Nicholas lie about a business trip that never happened. I watched Audrey cancel a dinner I had planned for weeks and then host one herself the next day, with my guest list. And I smiled. God help me, I smiled through all of it. Because if you're going to be discarded, you might as well learn everything about the ones tossing you out. And that's exactly what I did. I became a student of betrayal. I took notes, screenshots, photos. I tracked the rhythm of their deceit like someone learning a new language until it felt like my native tongue. And all the while I planned, not how to leave. No, how to end them. I thought maybe a vacation could fix it. Ridiculous, isn't it? That after months of lies, erasure, and quiet cruelty, I believed a change of scenery might sew us back together. Still, I clung to that delusion with the kind of desperation only a woman on the edge can understand. I started planning a trip to Dubai like it was the last prayer I had left. Not because I believed in magic or travel brochures or even Nicholas anymore, but because I needed to believe I had tried, that I hadn't just waited to be erased. For weeks, I poured myself into it, quietly, obsessively, comparing flights, selecting the hotel with the best skyline view, curating restaurants and experiences to make them feel something. Human. Together. Like a family. I printed the itinerary and had it color-coded. I prepared Audrey's favorite tea blends for the flight. I even researched private art galleries for Nicholas, the kind he used to talk about before spreadsheets replaced conversation. I wanted them to see me again, not the ghost they'd been walking past for the last 2 years. I wanted to be visible, vital. The night before the trip, I ironed Nicholas's shirts and laid out his cologne. He barely looked at me. Audrey was in the guest room, packing like a queen about to tour her empire. No one said a word about my suitcase by the door. No one asked if I needed help. I took that silence and swallowed it like glass. At dinner, I brought up the itinerary. Nicholas nodded without looking up from his phone. Audrey smiled politely. There was no excitement, No curiosity, just politeness so smooth it hurt. But I clung to hope. I thought maybe it's just tension. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe I'm imagining the distance. Morning came. They were dressed early, too early. The car pulled up. I watched from the window, holding my passport. Nicholas wheeled out 2 identical suitcases. Audrey followed in her beige trench coat, the one she wears when she wants to feel powerful and forgettable all at once. I opened the door, ready to ask, "Do you need help with mine?" But no one looked at me. No one said goodbye. They got in the car. The door slammed shut. The engine purred away like nothing had happened. I stood in the foyer, my suitcase still zipped, shoes still on. It took me a full minute to understand. They'd left. They'd gone to Dubai without me. Not accidentally. Not forgetfully. Intentionally. Casually. Efficiently. Like trimming fat off a steak. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. I walked into the kitchen and made coffee. Exactly 3 sugars, no cream. The way Nicholas used to drink it before he forgot he ever liked anything. I stared out the window and whispered to no one. All right then. They thought they'd discarded me like a paper cup. But what they really did was ignite something I'd spent years smothering. Not forgiveness, not closure, something far sharper. There's something grotesquely beautiful about silence after betrayal. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it just lingers. That morning, I sat in the kitchen long after my coffee had gone cold. Outside, the world went on. Cars passed, birds chirped, someone across the street watered their begonias. But inside me, something was shifting. Quietly, dangerously. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was calculating. You see, I had waited too long. I had bitten my tongue until it bled. Smiled through humiliation. Played the game of a good wife, good daughter-in-law, good ghost. I had waited for the apology, for a sliver of decency, for proof that love, or at least decency, still resided in the man I married. But Dubai changed that. Not because they left me, no, the pain wasn't in the abandonment itself, it was in how easy it was for them. Effortless, smooth, like I had never been part of the plan at all. So I opened the drawer, the bottom one in my desk that Nicholas never noticed. Inside was a slim black folder, labeled not with his name, but with a date. The day I stopped believing him. I don't remember the exact moment. It wasn't dramatic. Just one evening he told me he had to work late, and I knew, without reason, without proof, without panic, I knew he was lying. And that quiet certainty became the first seed of my preparation. Inside the folder were months of notes, printouts of bank statements, copies of deeds, photos I had taken from the second floor when he met with people he said he didn't know. A USB drive with audio recordings, soft, garbled conversations between Nicholas and Audrey, talks of dissolving assets, selling off company shares, setting up foreign accounts. No mention of me, ever. It was like I never existed. And in some strange way, that made everything easier. I knew where the cracks were. I knew where to press. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. That's where Thomas came in. He was Donald's old lawyer, retired now, cynical and sharp as ever. He liked me. Said I reminded him of his late wife. Quiet but terrifying when cornered. He'd seen through Nicholas long before I had. He just needed someone to light the fuse. Then there was Catherine. Smart, loyal to Donald, allergic to bullshit. She worked in hospital administration where Audrey had quietly begun funneling donations, clean on the outside, filthy underneath. Catherine had access, leverage, a memory like steel, and a fierce hatred for being manipulated. Between the 3 of us, we weren't just planning exposure. We were planning collapse. And the best part? They didn't even know I was awake. I waited until the night before they left. When Nicholas was in the shower, I opened his suitcase. Black leather, monogrammed, always perfectly packed by me, and tucked a white envelope inside. No return address, no explanation, just facts. Cold and absolute. I zipped it up, placed his shirt back on top, smoothed it down. 16 hours later, that envelope would detonate in a luxury hotel room somewhere in Dubai. And for once, I hoped they were enjoying themselves, because it would be the last peaceful night they'd ever have. It was 4:37 a.m. when the phone rang. I was already awake. I hadn't slept. Sleep felt irrelevant. I sat in the dark, bare feet on the cold marble of our bathroom floor, staring at my own reflection. I looked tired. Not sad. Not angry. Just finished. The phone vibrated again. Nicholas. His name lit up the screen like an old wound reopening. I let it ring once more, then picked up. His voice came through sharp, breathless, not like him. What the hell is this, Savannah? No hello, no how are you, just panic. Controlled men unravel differently. They don't scream, they snap in whispers. I said nothing. Savannah, what the fick did you put in my bag? He hissed. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable, then. Proof? He didn't speak for a second. Proof of what? He said, but it came out like a formality. He already knew. Offshore accounts under your name and Audrey's. Property titles filed to shell companies. The board minutes you tried to erase. Conversations you thought I couldn't hear. I said it calmly, almost gently, like reciting a grocery list. Should I go on? I heard him exhale, sharp and ragged. And then, another voice. Audrey. She was shouting in the background, her voice like gravel wrapped in silk. I told you that woman wasn't stupid. I told you to check your damn suitcase. I smiled. Savannah, listen to me, Nicholas said, shifting into the voice he used when he wanted to sell someone something. You're misunderstanding what this is. No, I cut him off. You misunderstand. I knew about Dubai. I knew you were planning the sale of our house behind my back. I know you've been draining our accounts. I know you and your mother used my name on forms I never signed. And I know, I leaned forward slightly, even though he couldn't see me, that you thought I'd never fight back. He fell silent. Audrey shouted again, distant this time, something about calling their lawyer. Nicholas's voice returned, lower now. What do you want? Money? A payout? You want to negotiate? I let the quiet settle before I answered. I don't want your money, Nick. Pause. I want your legacy. He laughed. It was hollow. That's not how this works, Savannah. No, I said. That's how it worked when I was asleep. Not anymore. And I hung up. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was electric. The kind that hums in the air just before a storm splits the sky open. I walked to the kitchen, made a fresh cup of coffee, and sat by the window. A different kind of waiting began. Not passive, not hopeless, but precise, surgical. They were coming undone. I could feel it. And I hadn't even touched the company yet. By the time the sun rose, the first thread had already unraveled. Catherine was the first to move. Before 9 a.m., she had revoked all back-end access Audrey held over the hospital's funding allocations. Simple, clean, no alarms. Audrey wouldn't even know it until her usual Monday report came back empty. Thomas, on the other hand, was handling the heavier blow. A meeting had been scheduled with the interim board of Donald's company, Savannah Holdings, where Nicholas was still listed as a majority proxy. That would change in less than 48 hours. I didn't need to be in the room to dismantle what they built. I had already placed the pieces exactly where they needed to be. Let me tell you something about power. It never leaves quietly. It claws, it spins, it calls in favors and threatens lawsuits and says things like, we've always been loyal partners. But if you hit it hard enough, fast enough, it doesn't have time to scream. By noon, the accounts had started to freeze. Nicholas called again. I didn't pick up. Audrey texted me. You ungrateful little bitch. I smiled. Thomas had informed the bank that there was suspected embezzlement, unauthorized use of joint property, and potential fraud involving real estate assets. He didn't accuse them directly, just asked questions, enough to make auditors nervous, enough to ensure that transactions involving Nicholas and Audrey triggered alerts. I wasn't just sabotaging them. I was exposing them. Carefully, systematically, without theatrics. No one wants a woman screaming revenge. But a woman calmly pulling receipts? That scares people. At 4 p.m., I got a message from a board member I hadn't heard from in years. Robert, one of Donald's old friends. "Savannah, is it true what I'm hearing about the private shares?" I simply replied, "Check the third quarter records. Line 14. 5 minutes later, he called me back. "Jesus Christ." Exactly. They hadn't just lied to me, they had betrayed Donald. That was their real mistake. Because for all the ways Nicholas resented living in his father's shadow, that shadow was still bigger than he ever realized. People respected Donald, trusted him. And those same people were now staring at Nicholas's signature on documents that bled deceit. By evening, the audit requests had started. I didn't have to do much, just sit back and let the dominoes fall. The difference between chaos and justice is preparation. I had all the time in the world to prepare. I had waited for this. But it wasn't just about tearing them down. It was about reclaiming the space where I was made invisible. Every lie they wrote over my life, I was erasing with truth. Cold, clinical, irrefutable truth. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't demanding. I was simply correcting the record. At midnight, Thomas called me. "He's scrambling," he said. "They're both in Dubai, trying to transfer funds through their third shell, but we caught it in time." "They're losing grip, Savannah." I didn't smile. I just whispered, "Good." And then I went to bed, for the first time in months, without fear. It started with a silence that felt off. The kind that doesn't come from calm, but from something being buried alive. Thomas called first. He didn't say hello, just breathed into the phone and said, "We have a problem." 3 words. That's all it took to send a chill down my spine. I was sitting in the sunroom, the same one Audrey used to brag about to her charity friends. She always said the light in that room made her look 10 years younger. Ironic how even light can lie. "What kind of problem?" I asked. "The petition, the audit, the request to freeze the last set of offshore funds? Blocked," Thomas said. "By court order." I frowned. That doesn't make sense. We had everything filed, legally. The documents are real. The signatures, the transfers, everything. "I know," he said, but someone moved faster. I didn't need to ask who. Nicholas, Audrey. But they hadn't used charm or logic or facts. They had used something more reliable. Money. A judge, one Thomas had never trusted, had dismissed our filing on grounds of insufficient basis. Just like that. The hundreds of pages. The months of evidence. The hours of surveillance, digital trails, tax inconsistencies. All swept off the table with a single stamp. I sat still for a long moment, trying to swallow the information, but it lodged in my throat like a bone. "They bought their way out," I said quietly. Thomas didn't argue. "And the regulatory board?" I asked. "Compromised," he said. "One of the senior reviewers is a friend of Audrey's. They're calling it a personal dispute, reframing the whole thing like some messy divorce spat with revenge motives." Of course they were. The story was already changing, quietly, efficiently. What had been a calculated exposure of corporate fraud and betrayal was now being rewritten as a woman scorned, spiraling into hysteria. The loving husband and his aging mother caught in the crossfire of a resentful wife. I could already hear Audrey's voice at the club. Savannah always had mood swings. Poor girl. I felt the walls closing in. Not from guilt, but from injustice so bold it made me physically nauseous. All this time, I had thought the truth was my weapon. But the truth only matters if the world wants to hear it. And the world had already turned its back. That night, I sat in the kitchen again, but this time I didn't make coffee. I poured a glass of red wine, one of the good ones Donald used to save for holidays, and stared into the deep, blood-colored swirl. All that work, all that control, all that planning, reduced to a footnote in someone else's story. I wasn't just losing. I was being erased. again. But this time, not by them, by the very system I'd trusted to protect me. And that hurt more than anything Nicholas ever did. The room smelled like old wood and sterilized betrayal. I stood at the end of the long mahogany table in the boardroom of Savannah Holdings. Yes, my name was on the company, but don't be fooled. I had become nothing more than a footnote, a decorative title left behind by a man who once believed in me. The board members filtered in one by one. Some I remembered from the early years, when Donald was still alive and Nicholas still pretended to care. Others were new faces, polished, indifferent, and already glancing at their watches. The air was sharp with tension, though no one spoke of it. Nicholas walked in 5 minutes late, of course. Audrey trailed behind, pearls and lipstick, her expression that familiar blend of pity and quiet contempt. She didn't look at me, but I saw the faintest smile when she passed. She had already won in her mind. That was her mistake. I had come armed. In front of me sat the folders, documents meticulously organized, hard drives labeled by month, testimony transcripts, even a forensic accountant's report on diverted funds. Thomas had helped me prepare the whole presentation. We had rehearsed it the night before, just in case my nerves caught fire. I didn't read from a script. I looked each member in the eye and told them the truth. About the missing funds, about the fake charities, about the asset laundering and offshore manipulations, about how Nicholas had used Donald's name as a shield for his greed, and Audrey had rewritten history in her own voice. I laid it bare, not with hysteria, but with clarity, like pulling a sheet off a corpse. I finished, I waited, and then Robert, the board chair, cleared his throat and said, "Thank you, Savannah. We appreciate your perspective." Perspective. I knew right then. It was over. Nicholas stood, calm, hands folded. "Gentlemen, ladies, you've heard a version of events. One I believe is heavily colored by emotion. I won't stand here and dissect every accusation, but I will say this. My wife has been under significant emotional distress, and unfortunately, it's caused her to see enemies in every shadow." Audrey nodded solemnly, like a damn priest. She has access to private documents, yes. She has clearly gone through files and twisted them to fit her narrative. And while I admire her tenacity, he even smiled. The bastard, this company deserves facts, not vendettas. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Catherine shook her head slightly. The look in her eyes stopped me cold. Not fear, not defeat, warning. It hit me in a single wave. The room had already decided. Not because they believed him, but because it was easier, safer. Nicholas meant connections. Audrey meant access. I meant risk, disruption, trouble, and they chose comfort over courage. Robert turned to me again, eyes empty. "We'll review everything, of course. But for now, Nicholas retains full administrative control while the matter is reviewed further." That was the nice version of get out. So I did. I picked up the folders, walked out without a word. My heels echoed down the hallway like gunshots in an abandoned city. And when I stepped out into the parking lot, the cold hit me like a slap. Not the wind. Reality. Everything I had done, every late night, every digit traced, every whisper recorded, reduced to a perspective. I wasn't just dismissed. I was rewritten, not as the woman who stood up to corruption, but as the wife who lost her mind. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. Instead, I drove to Donald's office, what used to be his, what I once thought would one day be mine. The lights were still on. Not because someone left them, but because some ghosts don't like the dark. The place hadn't changed. The same heavy desk. The bookshelf he'd built himself, slightly uneven on the left. The framed photo of him and Nicholas at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the one Audrey had insisted be blown up and hung like a shrine. I never liked that picture. Donald's smile was real. Nicholas's wasn't. I dropped the folders onto the desk. No one would read them now. Not really. The moment had passed. The war had been fought. and I had lost. Funny how loss doesn't always feel loud. Sometimes it feels like dust. Like standing in a room you once called sacred and realizing it's nothing but wood, paper, and old lies. My phone buzzed. I didn't check it. Another buzz. Then another. I finally glanced at the screen. Nicholas. I stared at his name for a long time. My thumb hovered over the green button. Not because I wanted to hear his voice, God no, but because part of me wanted to know what he'd say now that the blood had dried. I answered, said nothing. Savannah, he breathed. I know today was hard, but maybe we can talk. Just us. I didn't speak. I'm not saying we go back to how things were. Maybe we don't have to keep fighting like this. It's not good for either of us. Fighting, that's what he called it. I remembered the way he left. The way they drove off like I never existed. The way he smiled in that boardroom while cutting the last thread connecting me to the life I had built. You still don't get it, I said quietly. I'm trying, Savannah. Look, I know I hurt you, but you're hurting yourself now. You think this is justice, but it's just destruction. He really believed that. He thought this was about revenge, that I wanted to watch the world burn because I was bitter, angry, petty. He didn't realize. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was trying to save something. My name, my worth, the truth. But the system he belonged to, thrived in, wasn't built for women like me. It was built to silence us, to package us as unwell the moment we disrupted the story. I looked around the office one last time. Donald was gone. The legacy he'd built had been twisted beyond recognition. And me? I was just another forgotten widow of an empire that never wanted me to begin with. I hung up. And this time I didn't cry. I just sat there, in the ashes. Because sometimes when the fire ends, there's nothing left to do. But sit quietly and remember what it cost you. The next morning, I didn't pack anything. There was nothing worth taking. I walked through the house, our house, that felt more like a showroom than a home. Everything was in its place just as Audrey liked it. Sterile, curated, void of anything real. The pictures on the wall still showed smiling faces. Mine included. It felt obscene. I moved from room to room like a stranger in a place I used to love. I didn't touch the furniture. I didn't run my hand along the banister like I used to. I wasn't saying goodbye. I was shedding. I found myself in Donald's study one last time. The chair still creaked in the same spot. His mug still sat on the shelf behind the desk, untouched, collecting quiet dust. I don't know why, but I opened the bottom drawer. And there it was. A letter, addressed to me. I had never seen it before. It must have been written before he passed. The envelope was yellowed, the ink faded slightly at the corners. Savannah, if you're reading this, it means you're still here. And if you're still here, then something in you is stronger than they ever saw. You were never meant to be small, never meant to blend in. You were the sharpest mind in the room, and I saw that. I hope one day they'll see it too. But even if they don't, know that I did. I folded the letter, slipped it into my coat pocket. Not for comfort, for reminder. Not everything I built was a lie. Not every man I trusted turned to poison. I left the key on the desk. No ceremony, no final message, no scorched earth, just silence. And when I walked out that front door, I didn't look back. Not once. There's power in knowing you have nothing left to prove. That you can leave not as a victim, not even as a victor, but as a woman who survived the fire and decided to walk barefoot through the ash. No one saw me leave. No dramatic exit, just a quiet woman stepping back into the world, holding nothing but a folded letter and her own name. And for the first time in years, that name felt like mine again. It's strange how quiet the world becomes when you stop trying to be heard. I live in a smaller place now. Nothing grand. Just a third-floor walk-up with cracked windows and a view of the back alley. The kind of space people call humble when they don't want to say starting over. But I like it. No one here knows who I am. No one calls me Mrs. Collins. No one tiptoes around my last name like it's a loaded gun. It's just Savannah. Just me. Sometimes I still wake up expecting to hear Audrey's heels on the stairs, or Nicholas's voice in the kitchen, low and calculating. Muscle memory is a cruel thing. It keeps ghosts alive far longer than they deserve. But then I open my eyes and I see the cracked ceiling and I remember I made it out. Not unscathed, but out. People ask me if I regret it. The fight, the exposure, the fallout. I don't. I lost, yes, in every public sense of the word. They walked away with the company, with the story, with the power. But I walked away with the truth. Not the one in courtrooms or spreadsheets, but the kind that lives in your bones. Because no matter what they twisted, I know what happened. I know what they did. And knowing is enough. For now. Sometimes I think about women like me. The ones who stay quiet for too long. The ones who whisper their suspicions into teacups and hope the sound disappears. The ones who aren't believed when they finally speak. I think about how easy it is for the world to say, she's emotional, she's bitter, she's overreacting. No, we're accurate, we're exhausted, we're done waiting for someone else to tell our story. So I told mine. Not because it ends with justice, but because it deserves to be remembered. You don't always win. Sometimes they still get away with it. Sometimes money does by silence, and connections rewrite crimes into misunderstandings. But if even one person hears this and recognizes herself in it, then maybe silence didn't win this time. Maybe, just maybe, truth echoes louder than we think.